In a small, picture-perfect town, a prestigious wedding is set to unite two influential families. But when the groom's side discovers that the bride's cousin, a successful black man, has been chosen as the best man, whispers turn into tension, and the seeds of division are planted before the ceremony even begins. It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. The flowers had been ordered months in advance. The venue was a grand historic hall draped with white silk and crystal chandeliers, and every detail, from the engraved invitations to the live string quartet, spoke of perfection. Emma Carter, the bride, stood in her bedroom, sunlight spilling over her white gown. Her hands trembled, not from nerves of marrying the man she loved, but from the faint echo of the conversation she'd overheard downstairs. Her mother's voice, usually warm and soft, had been low and sharp. "I still don't understand why he has to be the best man." Emma's heart sank. She knew exactly who he was. Her cousin, Marcus Williams, a man she considered more like a brother than a cousin. Marcus wasn't just family. He was her rock. A decorated Marine, a self-made entrepreneur, and the person who had been there for her through every heartbreak and triumph. But in her mother's eyes, and worse, in the eyes of some on the groom's side, Marcus was a problem, not because of his character, not because of his past, but because of the color of his skin. Downstairs, the tension was already spreading like a silent fire. The groom's aunt, a woman with diamond earrings as large as her opinions, leaned over to whisper to her sister, "It's not a good look for the family." The other woman gave a disapproving shake of her head. And at a wedding like this, it's supposed to be about class and tradition. Marcus, unaware of the whispers, arrived at the Carter home that afternoon, his smile as bright as the summer sun. He wore a perfectly tailored Navy suit, the medal he'd earned in Afghanistan tucked neatly in his jacket pocket, a medal Emma had begged him to bring so she could show her guests the hero her cousin truly was. But as soon as he stepped in, Emma noticed the shift in the air. The conversations paused. Eyes darted toward him. One of the groom's cousins actually moved aside, as though Marcus's presence might contaminate her champagne. Marcus, always quick to disarm tension with humor, greeted everyone warmly. "I hear I'm the only one here who can make the groom look good in photos," he joked, but his smile faltered when he saw the stony expression staring back. Emma forced a cheerful tone. "Marcus, you made it. Come on, I want you to meet some people." But even as she pulled him toward the group, she caught snippets of muttered comments. "This is going to ruin the wedding pictures. Why couldn't she choose someone else?" The worst came when the groom's father, Richard, approached. He was a tall man, commanding in presence but cold in demeanor. He extended his hand to Marcus, but there was no warmth in the handshake. "I suppose you're—" "Marcus," he said, as though tasting something sour. "Yes, sir." "Best man, and proud to be here for Emma," Marcus replied firmly. Richard's lips thinned. "Well, let's just hope we keep things appropriate tomorrow." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, but he held his composure. Emma's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream at Richard to defend her cousin, but this was supposed to be a joyous time. That evening, as the rehearsal dinner began, the separation between the two families became impossible to ignore. The groom's side clustered together, their laughter tinged with smug glances toward Marcus. The bride's side sat with him, trying to shield him from the undercurrent of hostility. Then came the breaking point. One of the groom's uncles, after too many glasses of wine, stood up during the toasts and chuckled into the microphone. "Here's to keeping the family line pure and proper," he said, smirking directly at Marcus. The room went silent. The clink of glasses stopped mid-air. Emma's father shot up from his seat, his face red with fury, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. Marcus rose slowly, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "I fought for this country, risked my life so people could live free of prejudice and fear. I didn't think I'd have to fight for basic respect in a wedding hall. No one dared to speak." The unspoken truth now hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Emma knew then this wedding would not go as planned, and if the tension didn't break, her big day might just tear the family apart. The morning sun lit up the small, cozy kitchen, where Sarah sat nervously at the table, a cream-colored envelope clutched in her trembling hands. The golden letters embossed on it gleamed softly. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Emily Grace Thompson and Daniel Carter." Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at the names. Daniel Carter, the man she had loved, the man she thought she would marry. Sarah's mother, Linda, entered, wiping her hands on a towel. "What's that you're holding, honey?" she asked casually, before noticing Sarah's pale face. "It's an invitation, Mom," Sarah replied, voice low. Linda took it, scanned the names, and froze. Her eyebrows furrowed. "They invited you? After everything that happened?" Sarah nodded. "It's not just that, Mom. Daniel's marrying Emily, my cousin." The words hung in the air like an explosion. Linda slammed the envelope on the table. "They've got nerve. This is a slap in the face, Sarah." Before Sarah could respond, the back door swung open and Michael, Sarah's younger brother, walked in. He had just overheard enough to catch the gist. "What's going on?" "Your sister," Linda said with a bitter laugh, "just got invited to watch her ex marry her cousin." Michael's jaw dropped. "Oh no. No way. That's messed up on every level." Cut 2. Emily's home. The bride's perspective in a grand living room filled with fresh flowers and open wedding magazines. Emily sat on a velvet couch sipping champagne. Her best friend Chloe leaned over the seating chart. "So, you sent her the invitation? The Sarah?" Chloe asked. Emily smirked. "Of course I did. I want her to see what real happiness looks like. Besides, it's not like Daniel ever loved her the way he loves me." Chloe hesitated. "Emily, that's kind of cruel." Emily leaned back, twirling her engagement ring. "Life is cruel. Chloe, she had her chance. Now she watched me walk down the aisle with the man she lost." Back to Sarah's kitchen. The decision. Sarah stared at the invitation long after her mother and brother had left the room. She could hear the echo of Emily's laugh in her mind from when they were kids. They used to be inseparable until jealousy crept in. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret it if you show up. Some truths are better left buried." Her fingers trembled. Who sent this? And what truth? Something deep inside Sarah told her this wasn't just about a wedding. There was more, something Emily didn't want her to find out. For the first time that morning, Sarah smiled faintly. She picked up the envelope, held it over the counter, and instead of tearing it, she placed it carefully in her purse. She was going to that wedding, and she was going to uncover whatever secret they were hiding, no matter the cost. The reception hall shimmered under crystal chandeliers, but beneath the surface sparkle, tension was a living, breathing thing. Conversations fluttered like moths against the dim light of civility, but every so often, a sharp whisper sliced through the air. Emily stood at the edge of the crowd, champagne in hand, pretending to be fascinated by the tiered wedding cake in the center of the room. Her smile was perfectly practiced, but her ears caught everything. "I'm just saying," one woman murmured behind her fan. "A marriage like this will only bring trouble. Different worlds, different, you know." "You mean different colors," another replied, the words hushed but dripping with venom. Emily's stomach tightened. She turned slightly and saw them, Aunt Karen and Cousin Linda, their pearls gleaming under the lights, their judgment as plain as the wrinkles on their foreheads. Across the room, the bride, Aisha laughed with a group of her friends, unaware of the verbal knives being sharpened behind her back. She wore her joy like a crown, but Emily knew one overheard comment could chip away at it. The groom, Michael, moved toward Aisha, brushing a kiss across her cheek. His eyes were bright, but his shoulders carried the weight of invisible battles. He caught Emily's gaze and gave her the slightest nod, a silent acknowledgement that he, too, could hear the whispers dot at the far end of the hall. An older man, in a charcoal suit, Uncle Richard, leaned against the bar. He swirled his drink slowly, watching Aisha as though she were a puzzle he had no interest in solving. Emily had heard the stories. Richard had once been the patriarch of family gatherings, but ever since Michael announced his engagement, he had made himself the self-appointed voice of tradition. When the music slowed and the newlyweds began their first dance, the gossip didn't stop. In fact, it got quieter, sharper. His mother must be devastated. She's beautiful, yes, but will their children? I give it 2 years. Emily's fingers tightened around her glass until she feared it might shatter. She wanted to shout, to call them out for their ignorance, but she knew weddings could turn ugly in an instant, and she wouldn't be the one to light that fire. Still, she made a choice. Placing her champagne flute on the nearest table, she walked straight toward Aisha and Michael. The crowd parted slightly as she approached, as if sensing a shift in the air. "You two look perfect out there," she said warmly. But her eyes spoke a different language, one Aisha understood instantly. Aisha's smile wavered just a fraction. "Thank you, Emily." Before Emily could say more, Uncle Richard's voice boomed from the bar. "Michael, a word, if you don't mind." The music kept playing, but the atmosphere shifted. Michael glanced at Aisha, squeezed her hand, and walked toward his uncle. Emily watched him go, her instincts screaming that this was no friendly chat. She followed at a careful distance, just close enough to hear Richard's gravelly voice. "Look, son," Richard began, "I'm going to say what no one else has the courage to say. You've made a mistake tonight. A big one. And it's not too late to fix it." Michael's jaw clenched. "You're talking about my wife." "I'm talking about the family name," Richard shot back. "Mixing like this, it never ends well." Emily's pulse spiked. She stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Michael beat her to it. "Richard," he said, voice low but unshakable, "the only thing that won't end well is if you keep speaking about Aisha like that. You want to keep your place in this family? Start acting like family." Richard's mouth twisted, but he said nothing. Michael turned on his heel and walked back toward the dance floor. The muscles in his back taut. Emily lingered behind, watching. Richard's expression hardened. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot, and neither, Emily realized, was the storm brewing inside this wedding hall. The sunlight outside the lavish hall began to fade into a golden dusk, casting a warm glow over the polished marble floors and the glistening chandeliers above. Laughter and chatter filled the air as guests mingled, sipping champagne and posing for photographs. Amara stood by the dessert table, finally able to take a breath after hours of helping with last-minute wedding details. She watched her younger sister Zara, standing at the far end of the room in her flowing white gown, smiling brightly beside her groom, Michael. On the surface, it was perfect, two families united. But Amara knew better. Just as she reached for a plate of chocolate-covered strawberries, a hush rippled across the room. Heads turned toward the entrance. The music didn't stop, but it felt quieter somehow. A tall man in a dark suit stepped into the hall. His presence was magnetic, but not in a warm way. It was the kind of attention that made people whisper behind their hands. He walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the crowd, like a predator searching for prey. Amara froze. Her stomach twisted. She knew that face. It was Tariq, Zara's estranged uncle. the man no one had seen for over a decade, the man who had been disowned by their father after a family feud so explosive it was never spoken of again. The Grooms' side of the family looked confused, leaning toward each other to ask who the newcomer was. But on Amara's side, jaws were tightening, glasses were being set down, and mothers pulled their children closer. Tariq didn't wait for anyone to welcome him. He walked straight toward the head table, his shoes clicking loudly against the marble. Zara's smile faltered when she saw him, and Michael instinctively stepped in front of her. "Uncle Tariq," Amara whispered under her breath, almost as if saying his name too loud would cause more damage. "Hello, Zara," Tariq said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "You look just like your mother on her wedding day." Her mother, seated at the table, clenched her hands tightly around her wine glass. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly, but Tariq ignored her, his eyes darting to the guests around them. "I think the whole family should hear what I have to say," he announced. The crowd murmured. Amara stepped forward, blocking him. "This isn't the time or the place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time," Tariq replied, his smirk widening. "After all, isn't marriage about truth?" The tension was suffocating now. Guests were starting to take out their phones, sensing drama brewing. Michael looked at Zara, then at Amara, silently asking what was going on. Tariq's voice rose. "Before anyone celebrates, perhaps they should know about the secret your father has been hiding for 25 years. Gasps erupted. Zara's face went pale. "Stop," her mother said sharply, standing up. "Tariq, get out." But Tariq wasn't leaving, not yet. "I think they deserve to know why I was really cut out of this family. And it has nothing to do with what they've told you." Amara could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew if Tariq kept speaking, there would be no turning back. And then, from the back of the room, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the air. "That's enough, Tariq." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was their father. And he wasn't smiling. The air inside the lavishly decorated banquet hall felt heavier than the golden chandeliers above. Conversations dropped into uneasy whispers as Robert Hughes, Emily's father, stood at the edge of the room, watching his daughter twirl in the arms of her new husband, Marcus, a man he hadn't spoken to since the engagement announcement. Robert's silence wasn't just discomfort, it was judgment. His folded arms, tight jaw, and narrowed eyes had spoken louder than any outburst. He hadn't congratulated the couple. He hadn't even stood for the wedding photos. Emily caught sight of him from the dance floor, her laughter faltering. She knew that look. It was the same one he used when firing employees at the bank he ran. Cold, final. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked, pulling him toward the balcony. The chatter of the hall dimmed behind them, replaced by the night's cool breeze. Robert stared out over the city lights. "You went through with it," he muttered. "I told you I would," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "I love him, Dad," Robert's lip curled. "You think love makes the world forget the truth? He's not like us, Emily. You've put our family in the spotlight for the wrong reasons." Emily's chest tightened. "The wrong reasons? He's a good man. Better than most you've ever invited into this family. But because of his skin, because of his world," Robert snapped, finally turning to face her. "Do you have any idea how people will talk? My business partners? Our relatives?" Emily swallowed hard, tears welling. "You care more about your image than my happiness." Robert didn't deny it. His silence was his answer. Behind them, the balcony door creaked open. Marcus stepped out, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "Mr. Hughes," he began slowly, "if this is about appearances, I assure you, I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here because I love your daughter, and I won't let anyone make her feel small for choosing me." Robert's jaw worked as if chewing over words he couldn't swallow. He said nothing, turning back toward the glittering city, dismissing them both without a glance. Emily's hand gripped Marcus's tighter. Her father's silence had done more damage than any insult could. And for the first time that night, she realized this wasn't just a wedding. This was a battle line being drawn. Inside, the DJ announced the cake cutting, the guests cheering. But outside, on that balcony, the fracture in their family had deepened, and there was no going back. The reception hall was buzzing with awkward energy. The clinking of glasses and polite chatter couldn't hide the tension running like an undercurrent through the crowd. Emily sat stiffly at the head table, her smile frozen, eyes scanning the room as if expecting another disaster to strike. Across the dance floor, Michael was pacing in a small corner, his jaw tight. His sister Lisa approached him cautiously. "Michael," she whispered, "you can't keep glaring at them like that. People are noticing." "I don't care," Michael hissed, his voice sharp. They humiliated Mom in front of everyone. Lisa glanced toward their mother, Margaret, who sat at a table alone, her hands clasped in her lap. Her normally warm face was pale, her eyes heavy with the weight of the evening. The moment that had sparked all this was still fresh in everyone's mind. Emily's father, Richard, had refused to let Margaret sit with the family, muttering something about keeping things proper. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of where he thought Margaret belonged and where she didn't. Michael's patience had snapped then, but Emily had begged him to keep his cool. And somehow, for Emily's sake, he'd held back. Until now, the DJ announced the father-daughter dance, and all eyes turned to Emily and Richard. Emily's smile was stiff as her father took her hand and led her onto the dance floor. Michael's fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. Lisa touched his arm. "Please, Michael, don't ruin her day." He turned to her, his voice low but laced with steel. He already ruined it. As the music swelled, Michael started walking toward them. The crowd's murmurs grew as they noticed his determined stride. Emily's eyes widened in fear. She knew that look. Richard smirked slightly as Michael approached, as if daring him to speak. "Something you want to say, son?" Richard said, emphasizing the last word with mockery. Michael didn't hesitate. "Yeah, you're a hypocrite, and you've been disrespecting my mother all night. I've stayed quiet for Emily, but I'm not going to let you treat her like she's beneath you." Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but her heart also pounded with conflicting emotions, anger at her father and fear of what would happen next. Richard's smile vanished. "You think you can talk to me like that at my daughter's wedding?" Michael took a step closer, his voice steady. "I think I can talk to you however I want when you insult my family." The band had stopped playing, the room silent except for the faint hum of the lights. Every guest was frozen, their attention locked on the brewing confrontation. Margaret slowly rose from her seat, her hands trembling. She walked toward her son and placed a hand on his arm. "Michael, please, this isn't the place." He turned to her, his anger softening at the sight of her tearful eyes. "Mom, I can't let him get away with it." Margaret shook her head. "We're not going to win by shouting. We're going to win by walking away with dignity." For a moment, Michael stood frozen, torn between his boiling rage and his mother's quiet strength. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped back. "Fine, but this conversation isn't over." Richard chuckled bitterly, thinking he'd won the moment, but the room's mood had shifted. Guests were now looking at him with thinly veiled disapproval. Whispers began, people questioning his behavior, his arrogance, his prejudice. Emily looked between her father and her husband, her heart heavy. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but now it was a battlefield. And she knew the war had only just begun. The ballroom was glowing with golden light. the chandelier shimmering as if trying to soften the tension that still hung in the air. Guests were murmuring, trying to pretend the earlier conflict hadn't happened. Plates clinked, forks scraped, but no one's laughter rang genuine. On the stage, the wedding MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with forced cheer, "it's time for the speeches." The groom's father stood first, delivering a polished but cold speech that sounded more like a business report than a blessing. Every word dripped with condescension toward Aisha's family. People smiled politely, but many caught the icy undertone. Then it was Aisha's turn. She rose slowly, smoothing her gown, and walked toward the microphone. Malik's eyes followed her every step, sensing something was about to happen. Her parents, seated at the back, watched nervously. Aisha took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. She looked out over the room, not at the ones who had insulted her, but at the ones who had stayed silent. She could feel the weight of generations pressing down on her, whispering that a bride should be quiet, agreeable. But her heart thundered louder than those voices. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," she began softly, her voice carrying nonetheless. "But I've learned that silence in the face of wrong is just another kind of cruelty." The room stilled. Forks stopped mid-her. She went on, her tone growing stronger. "When you marry someone, you don't just marry the person, you marry their past, their culture, their family, and their story. And my story is not one to be ashamed of." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The groom's mother stiffened in her seat. "I've been told, directly and indirectly, that I don't belong. That my skin, my heritage, my family somehow make me less," she swallowed, steadying herself. "But let me be clear. I belong anywhere love and respect are present. And if those aren't here tonight, then maybe this isn't the wedding I thought it was." Gasps echoed. Malik's jaw clenched, but his eyes were wet. Aisha's gaze swept the crowd, finally landing on Malik's father. "I know this speech will make some of you uncomfortable, but love isn't real if it demands you shrink to fit into someone else's comfort zone. I will not shrink, and I hope my husband will stand beside me, not just today, but every day in that choice." The silence was deafening. Malik rose suddenly, walked to the stage, and took her hand. He turned to face his family, his voice steady but sharp. "She's right. And if any of you can't respect my wife, you can leave right now. This marriage is about us, not your prejudice." Two tables stood awkwardly. Some guests shuffled out. Others looked down, ashamed. But for the first time that evening, Aisha smiled, not because the problem was solved, but because the truth had finally been spoken, and the night felt different. The reception had ended in chaos. Guests whispered in corners, the DJ had packed up early, and the once pristine hall was now a graveyard of half-eaten cake and overturned chairs. Aisha sat in her hotel room, still in her white gown, mascara streaks marking her cheeks. She replayed the moment in her head. The moment her father had stormed onto the dance floor and shouted in front of everyone, "This marriage is a disgrace to our family." Daniel, her new husband, sat across from her in silence. His hands were clenched, his eyes distant. "I didn't think it would get this bad," he whispered. A knock at the door made them both jump. It was the hotel receptionist, holding a small brown envelope. "This came for you, ma'am. No sender name." Aisha hesitated, her hands trembling as she tore the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. "Aisha, you don't know me, but I know your father. There are things you need to know about why he's acting this way. It's not just about you marrying Daniel. It's about something that happened long before you were born. If you want the truth, come to the old community center at midnight. Come alone." A friend Daniel frowned. "This is suspicious. could be a trick. But Aisha felt something deep in her gut, a pull, a need to understand. If there's a reason behind all of this, I have to know. At 11:45 p.m., Aisha wrapped herself in a long coat and slipped out into the cold night. The streets were quiet, the glow of street lamps flickering. When she reached the community center, she found the doors unlocked, the building smelling faintly of dust and old wood. A shadow moved in the corner. A man in his 60s stepped forward, his face hidden under a hood. "You're Aisha?" he asked softly. "Yes. Who are you?" He pulled back his hood. "My name's Kareem. I knew your mother before she married your father." Aisha's chest tightened. "And?" Kareem sighed, his eyes heavy with decades of secrets. "Your father? He wasn't always the man you know now. Something happened years ago. Something involving a man from Daniel's family. It destroyed friendships, split the community, and turned your father into the man he is today." Her pulse quickened. "What happened?" He hesitated, then pulled out a faded letter. This will explain everything. But once you read it, there's no going back. Your view of your father, of your whole family, will never be the same." Aisha reached for the letter, but Kareem's grip tightened. "One more thing," he warned. "If your father finds out you've read this, it could tear your family apart forever." The weight of the moment crushed her. She took the letter, knowing that whatever was inside could either heal her family or destroy it beyond repair. As she unfolded the paper, her hand shook violently. Her eyes scanned the first line, and she gasped. The room was thick with tension. The wedding guests had been ushered into the lounge area of the estate, but whispers still filled the air like an invisible fog. Some clutched their glasses of champagne, others sat stiffly, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. At the far end of the room, Aunt Lorraine stood like a commander at the front lines, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. Across from her, Evelyn sat quietly, her eyes fixed on her folded hands. Marcus was by her side, his jaw clenched tight, ready to shield her from whatever came next. Meanwhile, Daniel the groom paced the length of the room, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with each step. "This has gone far enough," Aunt Lorraine said sharply, her voice cutting through the murmurs. This wedding was a mistake from the beginning. But clearly, some people needed proof. Evelyn finally looked up, her eyes calm but sharp. "A mistake? Or an inconvenience, because I'm not the color you wanted for this family?" Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel froze mid-step, his face darkening with a mix of anger and shame. "Lorraine, stop this. You're embarrassing all of us." "Embarrassing?" Aunt Lorraine scoffed. "What's embarrassing is watching a family name be dragged into the gutter because my nephew couldn't control himself." Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady but powerful. "No, what's embarrassing is pretending to be high society while acting like it's still." 1950. Evelyn doesn't need your approval, and neither does Daniel. Love doesn't come with a color code. But Aunt Lorraine wasn't done. "You think this is about color? It's about legacy, Marcus. It's about maintaining dignity and reputation. We have expectation standards that have been built for generations." "Standards?" Evelyn's voice rose for the first time. "Do you mean the kind that excludes people before they've even been given a chance? The kind that judges without knowing someone's heart?" For a brief moment, silence fell over the room. Then, from the corner, an older man's voice spoke. Up. It was Harold, the family's patriarch, Daniel's grandfather, who had been sitting quietly, watching everything unfold. "I've been alive long enough to see this family through wars, recessions, and scandals," Harold said, his deep voice steady. "And yet, this small-minded nonsense is what truly threatens our legacy. Lorraine, you talk about reputation as though it's something written in gold. But it's written in how we treat people. Aunt Lorraine's face paled. Father, you can't possibly— I can, Harold interrupted firmly. And I will. Evelyn, I've seen the way you've stood by Daniel through every obstacle. That loyalty, that strength, that's worth more than all the so-called standards Lorraine clings to. Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she held herself tall. Marcus gave Harold a respectful nod. Lorraine, Harold continued, if you can't accept Evelyn as family, then perhaps it's you who doesn't belong here. The room collectively inhaled. That was the first time anyone had openly challenged Aunt Lorraine's authority. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Daniel stepped toward Evelyn, taking her hand. I'm marrying her, he said clearly, his voice unwavering, with or without your blessing. And if anyone here thinks love is less important than appearances, you can leave right now. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved toward the door. Then Marcus, unable to resist, added with a slight grin, guess that makes this the most interesting wedding this family's ever had. A few people chuckled softly, breaking the tension just enough. Aunt Lorraine turned sharply on her heel and stormed out of the room without another word. Harold leaned back in his chair, a small smile on his face. Now, he said, shall we get back to the part where we celebrate love instead of tearing it apart? The crowd slowly relaxed, conversations resuming, though the air still buzzed with the shock of what had just happened. Evelyn squeezed Daniel's hand, her heart racing. The war wasn't over yet, but they had just won a battle that would change everything. And outside, through the tall glass windows, the wedding arch still stood, waiting for the ceremony that had been put on hold. The truth had finally been spoken. There was no going back. The wedding hall was quiet now, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft patter of rain outside. The guests had long gone, but the echoes of the day's chaos still lingered like a heavy shadow over the room. James sat at one of the tables, his head in his hands. The events of the day had left him drained, not just physically, but emotionally. Across the hall, Amara sat with her bouquet resting in her lap, staring at the floor. The white of her dress was still dazzling under the lights, but her smile was gone. Between them stood Evelyn, her eyes filled with guilt. I never wanted it to go this far, she said softly, her voice cracking. I thought I was protecting the family, but I was just protecting my pride. James looked up, his voice low but steady. Your pride almost destroyed us. Evelyn's eyes glistened. I know, and I'm sorry. I was wrong about you, about Amara, about everything. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Amara rose from her chair and walked toward Evelyn. You can't undo the past, she said, her tone calm but firm. But you can decide who you want to be from now on. I'm willing to try, but you have to meet me halfway. Evelyn's lip trembled. I will. The three stood in silence, the tension easing ever so slightly. Outside, the rain began to fade, replaced by the soft glow of a golden sunset breaking. Through the clouds. From the far end of the hall, a slow clap echoed. It was Grandma Ruth, her walking stick tapping the floor. Finally, she said with a half smile. Took you all long enough to figure out that love is bigger than tradition. They all laughed lightly, the first real laugh of the day. As they stepped outside, James took Amara's hand and whispered, We made it. No matter what happens next, we face it together. Amara squeezed his hand back. Together. The camera would pan upward, catching the three of them, James, Amara, and Evelyn, standing at the edge of the hall steps as the sky shifted from stormy gray to brilliant orange. A new day was coming, and with it, a chance for healing. Wedding that broke a family had, in a strange way, also begun to rebuild it.